Ma'am, let's move it along. This isn't a campsite and that rucksack isn't a hall pass. Customs Officer Mark Benton tapped the stainless counter with a pen loud enough to turn heads across international arrivals. A few travelers tittered, grateful the spotlight had found someone else. The woman in front of him, plain gray t-shirt, cargo pants, boots that had seen more gravel than carpet, lifted her weathered pack onto the counter without a word. Her tag read Tessa Quinn. Her face gave him nothing. Benton leaned in, practice smirk set. ID, customs declaration. And if you're carrying souvenirs with blades, do us both a favor and declare them now. The quip drew another ripple of laughter. Quinn didn't answer. She opened the pack with methodical care, fingers steady movements, small and precise, as if conserving motion the way a seasoned traveler rations water. The quiet only irritated him more. 50 feet away, in the priority lane for diplomatic arrivals, General Alan Mercer paused mid-conversation. He didn't see a tourist. He saw the way Tessa Quinn stood, weight centered over the archer's shoulders, relaxed but ready, chin-level eyes scanning without fidget. It was the stance he'd taught young officers to recognize, and the last thing he'd seen before some very hard nights overseas turned survivable. Mercer's gaze drifted to her hands. No tremor, no flourish, just deliberate economy. Predators moved like that when they weren't hunting. Professionals moved like that when they always were. The terminal hummed its usual uneasy music, rolling, suitcases, public address chimes, the tinny complaint of a child long past nap time. Benton had worked this checkpoint for years, long enough to pick up habits he mistook for instincts, quick judgments, quicker jokes, and the certainty that authority and wisdom were the same thing. He saw a young woman in field gear and filled in the blanks. He didn't notice the way Quinn avoided the reflective glass that made sight lines messy, or how she placed the rucksack lengthwise, zipper facing him, straps facing the hall so nothing snagged if a rush began. Mercer noticed all of it. "Let's not hold the line hostage, Ms. Quinn," Benton said, pen tapping again. "What's in the bag besides laundry and attitude?" He expected the easy win, a flustered apology, a scrambled stack of papers, the small power rush that kept long shifts tolerable. Instead, he got silence, not stubborn silence, but the kind that belongs to people who measure twice and speak once. Mercer felt the old, unwelcome tightening between the shoulder blades, the body's memory calling roll. He'd seen this scene before in different uniforms and languages, a loud gatekeeper, a quiet specialist, an audience eager to laugh. It ended one of two ways, either with a red face and a lesson learned, or with alarms. Across the counter, Tessa Quinn raised her eyes at last, not to challenge, but to mark distances, the doors, the guards, the blind corners, behind mirrored glass. Benton mistook it for insolence. Mercer knew better. In a place built to sort people into lines, someone had just failed to notice the only kind of line that mattered, the one between noise and competence. And it was about to be tested. The alarm didn't ring so much as rip the room in half. Red strobe struck the polished tile. The PA's flat voice hammered out code red lockdown, secure all stations. The line dissolved into panic. Suitcases toppled, announcements died mid-syllable, and doors slammed as blast shutters started their crawl. Mark Benton reached for his radio, then his pistol, then nothing at all. Fingers hovering, eyes gone wide. He was the loudest man in the room a minute ago. Now he was a statue waiting for instructions that wouldn't come. The threat announced itself with a scream and a flash of steel. A wiry man burst from the choke point by the customs carousel arm, clamped around a young agent's neck. The blade kissed the soft hollow beneath her jaw. Her badge swung like a metronome under the fluorescent light. "Back off," he howled, dragging her half-shield, half-anchor toward the exit before the shutters could seal it. Two officers squared their shoulders and shouted conflicting commands. The crowd compressed into a trembling ring of witnesses. Tessa Quinn didn't shout, didn't consult. Benton didn't make a speech. She moved. 3 steps, no hurry, no announcement. Step 1 angled left out of the attacker's eye line. Step 2 slid forward on the ball of her foot, centering over his base. Step 3 cut inside the nape arm hip, turned just enough to hide her center line. Her left hand found his elbow, not with force, but with quiet ownership. Her right hand captured the knife wrist thumb braced along the tendons that govern grip. Then came the turn a quarter spiral that borrowed his pull and fed it into a hinge his shoulder didn't want to open. Paying compliance, a bright, convincing message arrived faster than thought. The blade left his story before he knew he'd dropped it, clattering across tile. Tessa guided the agent free with a nudge that looked like courtesy and finished by settling the man face down, palm, posted elbow-locked weight, pinned where leverage dies. It took less than 3 seconds. The room knew it, even if no one counted. A shriek of metal concluded as the shutters thumped home. The alarms cut out, leaving only the sound of hard breathing and a knife spinning to a stop. Quinn released the man to the nearest officer as if returning borrowed property. She kicked the knife back toward the counter, edge away, then lifted both hands shoulder-high, palms open, professional shorthand for secure, settled move on. The freed agent squeezed her own elbows as if confirming she still owned them, eyes shining with shocked relief. Benton finally exhaled. The radio in his hand crackled, unsure whether it had been asked a question. From the diplomatic lane, General Alan Mercer stepped forward, voice low and even, not competing with what was already true. "You cover the weapon, you cuff and clear." Benton breathed first, then call it in. He wasn't taking charge so much as repairing grammar. His eyes returned to Tessa Quinn, the stance, the economy, the way she gave space back to the room the instant it was safe to do so. He had seen that kind of calm before, miles from polished tile and baggage belts, the quiet of someone who'd learned to ignore her own pulse until the work was finished. The perimeter detail flowed in at last, late to a problem already solved. Someone asked Quinn if she was hurt. She shook her head once, almost apologetic, and stepped away from the center she had occupied for precisely the amount of time required, and not a heartbeat more. Around them, fear began to drain into ordinary noise. Benton found his voice thin but serviceable, and started the report. Mercer kept watching the way a veteran watches a familiar constellation reappear after a long, clouded night, knowing this wasn't luck, and it wasn't reflex. It was training he could almost name in a story that wasn't finished. General Alan Mercer didn't waste the silence. "Officer Benton," he said, calm as a level retrieve, "Ms. Tessa Quinn's identification and present it to me." The order steadied the room more than the klaxon's ceasefire had. Benton moved awkward at first, then with the muscle memory of procedure, lifting the simple leather wallet Quinn had placed on the counter. He opened it like evidence, expecting a driver's license and maybe a travel card. Instead, behind the license, a small rectangle of matte titanium caught the light, non-reflective edges, chamfered lettering laser clean. Benton's brows pinched. Mercer held out his hand. The tag rested on the general's palm with a weight out of proportion to its size, unit, serial blood type, and at the bottom 2 words that didn't belong in any airport: Echo Squadron. He didn't look at Quinn first. He looked at the geometry of the metal, the font, the micro-engraved ridge that served as an anti-counterfeit signature. Authentic. The recognition hit not as surprise, but as confirmation. What he'd seen in her 3-step disarm, the elbow capture, wrist lock, and hinge rotation, was the close quarters grammar he knew from briefings he'd never discuss in public. Quietly, he turned the tag so Benton could read. The officer's face drained, then steadied into something humbler than fear. "Ma'am," Mercer said, squaring himself. He heel-clicked and raised a deliberate, regulation-perfect salute. No theatrics, no flourish, just the old ceremony performed as if the entire room were a witness stand. Around them, the perimeter team slowed, unsure whether to keep moving or to stand still for history. Quinn returned a small nod acknowledgement without spectacle, hands already lowering as if to give the space back to ordinary work. Benton found his voice. "General, Echo Squadron." His whisper carried farther than he intended. Mercer kept his eyes on Quinn and answered for the room. "Tier 1, black. If you've heard of it, you haven't." He softened the edge before it cut. "You saw what matters." He handed the wallet back across the counter himself, not delegating the gesture. Quinn slid the tag into its quiet pocket as if holstering a thought. A supervisor hustled up, breathless with questions. Mercer lifted a palm. "No names, no narratives. File a clean use of force report and a property receipt for the recovered knife, that's all." Then lower to Benton. "You were loud when nothing was happening. Be precise now that something did." It wasn't a rebuke so much as a calibration. The young agent swallowed and nodded. "Yes, sir." The freed officer, shaky, tearful, still intact, stepped toward Quinn with a thank you that died on her tongue. Quinn saved her the strain. "You did fine," she said, almost conversational. Breathe through your feet next time. It sounded odd until Mercer saw the young woman try it. Exhale down knees, unlock shoulders, drop. The tremor left her hands. For the crowd, the tableau resolved. The tourist wasn't a tourist. The general wasn't grandstanding. The salute wasn't theater. It was one professional recognizing another across a gulf the rest of them didn't need to cross. Procedures resumed. Radios buzzed with the small necessary verbs of a system repairing itself. As Quinn shouldered the worn rucksack, Mercer spoke just loud enough. Ms. Quinn, thank you for your work. It was both farewell and invocation. She inclined her head and slipped back into the stream of travelers, a quiet asset returning to anonymity, leaving behind a terminal that suddenly understood the difference between noise and competence. As the automatic doors sighed shut behind Tessa Quinn, the checkpoint returned to motion, but not to normal. Within the hour, the camera angles that had witnessed every frame of the standoff were box-logged and spirited away under a classification stamp that seemed to darken the air itself. General Alan Mercer signed a chain of custody form without flourish, then spoke a single sentence to the station chief. Treat, this is a privileged doctrine, not gossip, and left the hall quieter than he had found it. The footage vanished. The lesson did not. By late afternoon, a rumor with the hard edges of truth had already migrated from break room to briefing room. A traveler with a beat-up rucksack had ended a hostage crisis in 3 seconds, and a general had saluted her. Policy followed quickly. An internal directive, concise, unadorned, unmistakably, Mercer's reframed the agency's screening philosophy: behavior over appearance, cues over costumes. A curriculum team rebuilt the academy's first-week block from the bottom up. The new module began with silence, no slides, no preamble, only a minute of stillness, while an instructor stood motionless at the front of the class. Then came the prompt, tell me what you see. Recruits learned to inventory the human baseline: posture, hands, breath, gaze before they ever touched a passport. The case study anchoring the block carried a spare title in black letters, The Ghost of Gate C-12. No names, no dates, just a sequence, lockdown chaos. A hostage taken, 3 steps, an elbow, wrist, shoulder rotation, blade on tile, release. The takeaways were plain and brutal. Adrenaline makes noise. Competence makes order. Mark Benton did not escape the story he helped write. There was no reprimand ceremony, no public spectacle, only a reassignment memo to a windowless office labeled Temporary Detailed Documentation Review, a place where the fluorescent hum left space for reflection. He showed up early, stayed late, and filled a notebook with what he had missed: the way Quinn's fingers never fumbled, the way her feet slid rather than stomped, the way her eyes mapped the room before anyone else had found the radio. When the academy requested experienced officers to assist in the new curriculum, Benton volunteered. He stood before recruits with a tone so measured it surprised his colleagues and said, I don't want you to remember me. I want you to remember your blind spots. Then he taught them how to run a 3-count scan, hands, hips, horizon, before a single question left their mouths. The field training changed too. Role players in plain clothes were hired not to look dangerous, but to move dangerous. The best evaluations went to trainees who noticed the tight funnel of a shoulder line, the concealed tension in a forearm, the way panic can be acted and calm cannot. In after-action reviews, instructors now asked, when did the room get quieter? It was a new metric order as evidence of judgment. In the agency's lore, the event settled where legends live not on posters, but in muscle memory. Veterans began telling rookies, Gate C-12 isn't a place, it's a question. Are you seeing what matters? Mercer didn't repeat the story often, and Tessa Quinn never appeared in it when he did. That restraint was part of the doctrine. The point wasn't a hero, the point was a standard. And for the few who had stood under the hard lights of that terminal, the memory that persisted was not the classification stamp or the whispered unit name. It was the quiet after the knife hit the floor, 3 heartbeats of ordered silence, when competence, unadvertised and undeniable, retook the room. By month's end, the checkpoint sounded different. Radios were lower orders, shorter, and the silence after a decision felt earned. Humbled by what he'd seen, Mark Benton began volunteering for the academy blocks, not as the man with answers, but as the cautionary example. He'd stand before a room of rookies and say, I missed the only 3 things that mattered: hands, hips, horizon. Then he would replay the sequence on a whiteboard, teaching breath control and that first quiet scan before a single word leaves the mouth. His mantra spread from break room to gate shack. Slow is smooth and smooth, lets you see. One by one, the hot takes faded. In their place came deliberate checks, softer voices, better work. General Alan Mercer kept it that way. At the next graduation, he spoke without slides, without flourish. He told a nameless story of a crowded terminal, a knife, and 3 seconds of ordered calm. Judged by control in the storm, he said not by volume wardrobe or biography. The auditorium full of new officers and their parents held still in the respectful hush. Veterans recognized the sound of truth landing. Tessa Quinn was already gone, folded back into the quiet places where people like her do their work. No interviews, no citations, only the shifting of practices in rooms she would never enter again. The doctrine solidified behavior over appearance, outcomes over opinions, competence that doesn't announce itself. On break room corkboards, the reminder was simple. Calm is a skill. Practice it. For those of us who've worn a uniform, the moral feels familiar. The loudest voice is rarely the steadiest hand. What saves people on a flight line, a freeway, or a family dinner gone sideways is the person who breathes, notices, and acts with precision. If that resonates, share a moment when quiet judgment made the difference in your life.